there's been times in my life where I've kind of wondered how I stepped into luck. Why that luck was always on my shoulder and kind of watching out for me and making sure that I took the right path, or even if when I didn't take the right path, I was lucky to get off that wrong path quickly. And I just thought it was me that was lucky. Always finding the right people to play with, always finding a good bargain on a guitar, and always setting me right back to where I really needed to be. Even when I ventured off into uncharted political things, something would pull me back to music. Now I stay there. And talking with my dad told me a story about how Lady Luck had kissed him. And I'd like my dad to tell that story in his own words. So that's it. Here's my dad.
I was upstairs taking the bath, whatnot. Now the steam must have affected me and the breathing and whatnot. Something was going on in here. And I started sweating and what have you. Now, me telling you the story, I couldn't see how my face was deforming. It was going like blowing up, right? So I told my mother at the time, I said, Mom, I want to go upstairs. I said, I don't feel good. So she said, will you take a bath upstairs? I said, okay, take a bath. What I did, right? Well, I got in the tub, and I'm sitting in the tub. It's like a sauna. It was the steam and everything was coming up. And I got very, very listless in the bathtub. I got to the point where I couldn't say nothing, just going, Ma, I don't feel good, because we lived downstairs, we were upstairs. Well, anyway, as the story goes, when my mother got to the room over there, she says she looked at my face, and it was like a balloon. It blew up, red as all heck. And the rest is, the story goes, that she called the doctors, right? At that time, I couldn't speak to the doctor. You had to call the doctors. In those days, there was only 2 or 3 doctors that anybody knew each other. So we got a hold of the Dr. Lamardo and another doctor, right? We didn't get to the 3rd doctor yet. So while I was telling the story, it was getting blown up and blown up like a balloon when you blow up a balloon. And it was a shiny stage, you know? So from that point, we got I can't remember what, it was supposed to be a specialist. Now getting a specialist back in those years, the money part was a big factor. They do not visit you until you said it's going to cost you $500 or what have you. Now we had a candy store, we owned the building, confectionery store, what have you, you know. So in the meantime, the doctors come over and I was upstairs in bed. So the doctor come in and they examined my face, right? This story from here on in, I was told, right? So I'm sitting there in the tub over there or in bed wherever I was, you know. So I got this guy, 2 or 3 doctors, they couldn't find out what in the world is causing the big side of my face, right? So they called a few doctors, says, I don't understand this. And they called another one, where we're trying to evade the specialist from coming in because the money wasn't there. That was a big factor at the time. All right. So they finally ended up that one of these specialist doctors, they said, let's call in a specialist, right? So when a specialist came in here, he said, well, let's call a Dr. Lentz. It was in the area of the teeth and the tooth and what have you, know? So as soon as they come up there, it was like when you're blowing up a balloon. He says, call the ambulance right now. The dentist says, rush them to St. General Hospital. He said, we're going to have an accident if we don't make it. So I ended up, of course, in the hospital there and whatnot. But after it was all over, I was in the hospital, I had the bandage around my faces and whatnot. Now, as far as money was a big factor, so everybody was wondering, where the hell are you going to get this or where are you get that? But my mother was saying, and my father, do it. It's got to be done, right? Now, the reason why I started, at the beginning, you get a general idea, basic, what was going on, right? So when I was operated on, I imagine must have been about a week later, they did operate, they actually found my jawbone was blowing up, like we say, blowing up, whatever, maybe I can't find the words, right? So when I ended up in the hospital, I ended up with the bandage around there and whatnot. So when the doctors came out, everybody was going, like, what are we going to do now? So Aunt Nancy says, let's go visit a fortune teller. And those were big days, with the whatnot, What was told to me then was through Aunt Nancy and a few other people. That's the only one I can remember, right? So he says, when he has his factory, he says, the fortune teller told me, or told the people, that he says, do you believe in the fortune teller? That's the first things that come out. So they believe in the cards and everything else. So he says, have you got a dog? We had a little puppy then. So I said, yeah, why not? Yeah. So he said, listen, he says, your son went through an operation. It's up in God's hands, or that particular time, Now, if the dog gets hit by a car, he says, you would live. But if the dog don't get hit by a car, the crisis would be over. So it was told to me. So when I did it the next morning, whether it was a phone call, that's the unimportant part, right? They got a phone from the hospital. He said, your son passed the crisis. Because in that particular incident, when the dog got hit by a car, the spell was broken.
Who was the one that told you about your dog being hit? How did you find out about your dog getting hit by a car?
Well, I guess who was there? It could be Aunt Nancy, it could be my mother, and the doctors. And then when I passed the crisis, they called my mother up and say, he says, your son passed the crisis. So they told me, he says, somebody must have told him I went to fortune teller, right? So he said, well, we did go to a fortune teller, and they told us of all these doctor's visits and whatever. It was a very, very crucial operation. The entire left jaw was, what do you call it?
Affected? Deteriorating?
Deteriorated, what have you. And they call it, first one told me they thought it was mastoids from my ear to my jawbone. It was in that direction, yeah. But they find it in terms, candy was a big factor. So, because when I used to get a toothache, I never used to tell my mother about it. I was a kid, I was like 8 or 9 years old, So assuming, I never told her I had a toothache. So when all these weeks, even before the operation, I didn't say a word to my mom. I just let her go. Maybe that was the way it was in life, was. So the story ended, it said the fortune teller told, and I'll repeat it, such as when the dog got killed, I lived. And if it lived, I would die.
What was the dog's name?
We called him Boy, I think. I don't remember. Could have been a puppy. And we lived on a corner. We owned this building. Everybody was sitting outside over there, and it was very busy. Busy street called Central Avenue. And the dog got a little away, and he scooted out of the street, and the dog got killed.
Did you ever know that luck would travel with you for the next 6 or 7 decades?
Let me say this. Every time I speak of the story, it relates, through your mind, saying that, hey, if it wasn't for the dog, here I am. Don't forget, I had 3 or 4 different doctors. They couldn't find out. So I relayed on the fortune teller. And here I am, I'm telling it on camera today.
Do you feel like a lucky man?
Oh yes, all the way.
Tell the camera.
That's why
I'm a lucky man.
Boy, I'm a lucky man. I don't even go to, I go to Atlantic City. I don't have no luck over there. I have my luck with the dog.
Poppy, that was a great story. Thank you so much. That was so great.